Hello, everybody, and welcome to part one of Getting Organized in Your Craft Room. I'm Shauna Robeson from Creating Space Coastal, and today I'm going to be talking about ways to get organized with your craft supplies, your art supplies, and ways to think about improving your access to your stash, because that's the goal. The goal is accessing your stash. So I'm going to be starting with the presentation. I'm going to give you some organizing 101, if you will, and then I'm going to be talking specifically about ways you can think about organizing within a craft room or your craft supplies. And then part two, I'm going to actually give you a tour of my stash and give you some additional organizing tips. I was a professional organizer for over 11 years, so I actually enjoy organizing my stash almost, but not quite as much as I enjoy using my stash. And for me, it's really important to not stop my creative flow. I have ADHD, so I need to know where my things are. I can create the biggest mess in the world, and I know this about myself, but I also know that when I need something, I want to be able to have it at my fingertips. So some people can have everything around them and they're perfectly fine with that and know exactly how to get their hands on it wherever it is. But I need to create systems for myself that help me to be able to find the stash, my stash, when I'm ready to use it. So for those of you who maybe need a little bit more order in your craft room or your art studio, this is the topic for you. So let's get started. So first of all, if you're going to be delving into organizing, that can be quite challenging and stressful in and of itself. And I know it gives a lot of people anxiety just thinking about the idea of trying to organize. Now, hopefully the tips and tools that I'm going to be giving you today will make it a lot easier and make it fear-free. Hopefully. Maybe not until you get started and see, oh, maybe it's not as bad as you think. But first you need to have some motivation, because I think when you get in the thick of it and things can get challenging, you need to know why you're doing it. What are your motivations? What are the benefits that you can gain from being organized in your craft room? So let's just talk about some of the benefits, and these may resonate with you or they may not. But if you find that, oh, I don't really have any reason to get organized, maybe you don't want to even go there, because there is some work involved. I just want to be like straight with you. There is some work involved to get organized, but once you get there, oh my gosh, it's amazing when you can just go, oh, I need a button, and know exactly where to go to find it in seconds. You know, you continue with your project and you don't have to stop the flow. So why organize? First, well, time. Time is money, but it's also time spent on something else. So the less time I spend searching for items, that button say, the more time I can spend creating something with that button. So for me, it really is nice to just be able to go, okay, I know I have this thing, I know I can go right there, and that's where it's at. And I grab it and I continue with my process, and I don't have to waste any time hunting and gathering all of my supplies. And this is even if you're, just starting out a project, you want to be able to just gather what supplies you're going to need. Maybe you didn't think of something and you think of it midstream and you just want to grab it and keep going. You don't want to have to stop the process. So time is really important. It's limited resources. Nobody can add time to the day. It's 24 hours a day for everybody, no matter who you are. So spend it wisely. Spend it creating. Next is quality. If you're in the middle of working on a project and you do need something and you go, oh my gosh, I know I have this thing, and you can't find it because it's hidden somewhere. If you can't access it, it's kind of like you don't even have it, and you may either decide not to use it for that project, even though it would be perfect for it, or you may just decide that you have to get it and you have to stop the process and go get it. So that's going to lead to my next topic here. But if you can't find it, you can't use it. So it's really important to have everything accessible so that when you're in the flow, you're not going to stop that creative flow energy to have to go find that thing that you have. Next is money. So if I don't find it and I don't want to stop the flow, but I really need this item to make this project perfect in my mind, then I might actually stop the process and actually go buy another one. Now, this is of course a waste of money. If you already have it, there's no sense in spending more money. And oftentimes when I was a professional organizer, I would find duplicates, triplicates, octuplicates, I don't even know if that's a word, but of certain items because people just kept rebuying them, and it can be such a waste. And I know that there's the idea that, okay, well, if I go buy it, then I'll just use it later, right? Well, what happens is some things become obsolete. Some things have shelf lives, so you can't always use those items later. It depends on what it is. And the chances are, if you lost the first one, you might lose the second one and not be able to use that either, and then buy a third one. So it's more important, I think, to just be able to kind of keep things in somewhat enough of order so that you don't have to waste your money on that, and then you can spend money on more art supplies that you do need that you don't already have. That would be my choice, because every time you make a choice for one thing, you're making a choice against something else. So if you're spending money here on this duplicate, you're not spending that money on maybe this new tool that would really make this job easier to create. So keep that in mind. The next thing is health. Stress is very damaging to our bodies, and there's a lot of ways that we can be stressed out. And of course, the creating process shouldn't be stressful at all. It should be a healing process. So when we have to look for something or get frustrated because we can't find something or we can't use something, that's going to add to our stress. But the other thing that can add to our stress is if our space is cluttered in a way that we can't use it, we can't get to our workspace, or we can't use our items. The clutter itself, and I'm going to define clutter as when it gets to the point where it's harmful. Some people can function very highly, surrounded by all of their things, and they know exactly where to reach to find a particular thing. I don't function that way, but a lot of people do, and that's perfectly fine. And as long as what you have is working, then go for it, sister or brother. Use it how you want to do it. Some people can have a pile and they can find exactly in that pile where something is. That is not how I function. So I have to have systems. And so that's what I do. But if that's how you work, then wonderful. When it becomes more distractions, kind of like static, because everything around you is demanding attention. It either is something to do, or maybe you need to clean it or decide about it or put it away or whatever it is. So all those things that are lying out can turn into very mentally draining static in your mind, because you might be like, okay, I got to make something with that, or I got to put something with that, or I got to do something with that, or I got to move that to dust. So when we can calm our workspace and make it to where we can be more creative and not be dividing our mind by all of these things that are distracting us, then we're going to be able to relax more, have a calmer energy. And that's, I'm not saying you work in a sterile environment by any means. My space, and you'll see when I give you the tour, I have plenty of projects going simultaneously, and what a lot of people might see as mess, I see as projects in progress. So I would never suggest to have a sterile creative environment, but if you can say, okay, this thing has a home, when I'm ready to not be using it and I don't need it on my workspace, I know where I can put it. That's going to really help relax you so that you can just get it put away and then move space for your next project. And you're not stressing about it being in your way and what you do with it and how to decide about it. It's just, oh, that goes there. So that's the goal we want to get to, the place where you can think, where does this live? You can think, oh, it goes right here. I can put it away, out of my way if I'm not using it. If you're using it, by all means, have it or all around you. The more the merrier. All right, so Now let's get to actually getting organized. I'm a little of the old school, so I still love the Julie Morgenstern's organizing from the inside out principle of space, the space model, and I've kind of adapted it for my purposes, but I do highly recommend that book. She has a few. Now I know that there are new organizers, crazes out there, Marie Kondo, for example. So follow whoever inspires you. There are a lot of parallels, but I still use this model, and this model you can use organizing anything from time to space, to your schedule, to papers, anything. And so anyway, I still use it to this day, and I love it. So, and that's actually where the creating space name comes from. It's not only for a space where I create, but it's also creating space in your life for the things that you love to do, for your passions. And so the 5 steps to creating space are: S is sort, like items. So for example, and we'll talk about categories related to crafts in a moment, but if, for example, you're sorting a junk drawer, you might find, writing implements might be one pile, and you might have adhesives, glues, tapes, etc. are in another pile, and you might have things related to keys, keychains, keys, etc. in another pile. So just putting things that are similar or related in some way, you get to decide how they're related, put those together. And it's easier once you get all the like things together to decide, okay, maybe you have a pair of scissors in this drawer, but if you got all your scissors together and you found out that you had 25 pairs of scissors, maybe then you could decide, oh, I don't need 25 pairs of scissors. But if you only saw a pair of scissors here one time and then a pair of scissors over here another time, you wouldn't necessarily realize that you have so many pairs of scissors, and you wouldn't know that you could let some of those go. So when you bring them all together and you see everything that you have, and you see, oh, I've got, 15 rolls of tape or something like that because I kept buying it because I kept not being able to find it, then you can maybe let go of some. You can just assess really, truly if you need those things. So that's the next step, is to purge. Now this is challenging when it comes to arts and crafts, and I know that this in particular I had to do in stages. It wasn't necessarily my second stage. I mean, it sort of was, but you may have to do it in stages because it's hard to let go of that, and you'll understand more why in a minute if you don't already. But my rule is purge things that you don't use, need, okay, or love. Now, obviously, it's easy to assess whether you use it. You can say, okay, when's the last time I used it? Well, yesterday. Okay, I used it, so it stays. Unless you used it and you didn't like using it, then maybe you won't want to keep it. But if you use it, okay, it can stay. If you don't use it, but you need it. Now, a good example I like to use of this is a fire extinguisher. I hope I don't use it every day. I hope I never use it. I hope I never, ever use it. But if I did need a fire extinguisher, I certainly want to have that available. So that would be an example of something that you maybe don't use, but you do need. So it's sort of emergency cases only type of thing. And then the last category, which is the tricky one, is love. And this is hard because I love pretty much anything related to creating. So when it comes to art and craft supplies, I had a really hard time saying I didn't love everything. But I was able to at some point go, well, you know what? I don't love knitting, and I have all this knitting stuff, and I made everybody a scarf, and then I was pretty much over it. So I had to sit and think, okay, can I let go of my knitting stuff? Maybe there's some things I could repurpose, or maybe there's just some things that I can let go and pass it on to someone else. So, so you really have to know, do you love the craft that you're doing, or are you just doing it because it's like, okay, I want to try everything, and that was one of those things I tried and I just didn't love it, and then you can let that go and help somebody else to maybe find that it is their thing. Okay, the next step after you purge, and again, like purge can be in cycles, but you want to at least get rid of things that are that you can obviously let go. If it's broken, if it's not even functional, there's no way to use it, it's obsolete, then maybe you can let it go. And there might be other purposes that someone else can use it for. Okay, Once you've let go, now you have everything that you want to keep. Theoretically, there might still be some purging that happens down the road, but theoretically now everything that you have left is what you want to keep, and you can start thinking about where you want that to live. So the third step is assign an address for the items you want to keep. Now, and I'm going to talk more in details about how to do this in a moment, but that's like, where in the house do I want to have this live? And again, I will go over more details. The next step is to containerize. Now, a container doesn't necessarily mean it's a specific container, but you're basically, think of it like the house that it's going to live in. So now it's going to be in this room and on this shelf. And that's the specific address and home that this is going to, like maybe the room or the house that it's going to live in. Okay, the final step is equalize, which is the biggest challenge. That's maintaining the system. And again, I'm going to give you some more details on related to crafts in a second for all of these categories. So let's delve into crafts. So sort, purge, assign, containerize, and equalize. Space. Create space in your life for what you love. It's a great acronym. All right, so going into details of sorting. For craft supplies, this, that can be challenging because it depends on how many crafts you do. Now for me, I do mixed media, which is a conglomeration of several different crafts. So I have to kind of break those up, and I have to think about how to break those up. And that's the way that's what you'll need to do too, is decide how do you want to categorize like items. And you go from broad categories to narrowing it down. And I'm going to give you some tips on doing that. But the first thing that you're going to want to do is have some masking tape or post-it notes so you can label containers, boxes, piles, whatever it is in the process. So a marker, masking tape, or sticky notes. Empty bins, boxes, baskets, laundry baskets. Banker boxes are nice if you have a lot of stuff that you have to organize and you don't have a lot of floor or table space. That way you can stack up. I wouldn't stack them until you have a full box though, because you want to be able to keep filling those up in the process. And then when you gather the like items, again, break it down. If you have a huge category where you have lots of stuff, you could start with broader categories and narrow it down. And some ways to categorize them are by function, like knitting, sewing, painting, for example, or you could think about it by the material, yarn versus fabric, versus watercolor paints or acrylic paints, or the characteristics. Maybe some of the fine tuning of categorizing, you might think about its function, like the consistency or texture of it, or is it water soluble or oil based. So there are lots of characteristics with which you can use to categorize these items. And here are some examples for crafts specifically. Now, within these broad categories, here's several breakdowns that you could go into. So for painting, for example, there's acrylic, there's watercolor, oil. Now, you may only have acrylics in your stash. So really, the more simple your stash is, the more simple this process is going to be. If you only have acrylic paints, then all you have to do is say painting, and that's your whole section, right? So these are just a list of just some different breakdowns of crafts and what some subcategories might be, but yours is going to be very unique to what your stash looks like. Now here's another example using the paint, for example. If I think of painting, again, that could be acrylics, watercolor, and oil. But then I can break down acrylics even further by saying, okay, within acrylics, I have the paints, I have the substrates, which is what you paint on, so the canvas, for example, and then I have brushes and tools. So I might divide out, put all my brushes together, put all, so as I'm sorting these like items, this is what I'm thinking. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to get all my acrylic paints together, all my brushes and tools, all my canvases and things like that. So now I've broken those categories up. And within that, you can even break it down further. So within the paints, and it really depends on how you use them. If you just use any acrylic paint, doesn't matter what characteristics it has. Any acrylic paint is going to work for whatever projects you like to do. If you're doing more like journaling or whatever, it doesn't matter whether it's the fluid or soft body, you're just going to go grab whatever color, then break it down by color, because that's what you're going to be thinking about when you go to grab it. If you're going to be thinking about the thickness of it, because maybe you want impasto, or then you want to maybe sort them out by the consistency of the paint. So it really is going to depend on how you think about the category. How you use it is how you're going to break down those categories. And again, start broad and then narrow it down as you go through the process. It's going to be like, maybe first step is going to be, okay, I'm going to get all my craft stuff together. And then the next step is going to be, okay, now I'm going to separate my craft stuff into categories by whatever craft it is. So this isn't just a one-step process. This is it has layers and layers. Okay, another example of just looking at broad to narrow is arts and crafts is a large category. So maybe if you're gathering your arts and crafts from around the house, you might go to the guest room and grab your arts and crafts from there. You grab them from the bedroom, and you grab them from the study, and you grab them from the living room, and you bring them all together. So that's separating everything related to arts and crafts. And then within that, you're breaking it down. For example, painting, acrylics, paints, the quality of the paints, and then the color. That's breaking it down into smaller and smaller categories, again, depending on how much you have. If you have a little bin of acrylic stuff and it all fits in that bin, then put all the acrylic stuff in one bin, and that's your category. You don't have to break it down onto these small details. That's only when you have so much that you need to break it down a little bit further. All right, and again, it just makes it easier. Like, you probably wouldn't store your brushes in the same bin as your paints just because of how it fits. So even if you could fit them all in a bin, you probably would maybe sort out the brushes and say, okay, that's going to live in a jar separately. So different house, different container. All right, so that's how to think about creating categories to sort things by like. The next step is to purge. And again, I said, do you use it? So if yes, you use it, great, it's a keeper. If you say no, then ask yourself, why don't you use it? Is it because it's one of those emergency only things like the fire extinguisher? Then that goes in the needed pile. If you don't use it because I didn't know I had it, or I couldn't find it, or whatever, then it's like, okay, well then use it. Use it or lose it. Now, that doesn't work well with the whole, fire extinguisher thing. There are some things that you're just not going to use unless you need to. And hopefully you won't need to use that. But in art supplies, most things are probably not an emergency, break if there's an emergency. Most of these things you probably could find a way to use them. So if you decide to keep something, I would encourage you to find a way to use it. So the next step, like I said, is needed. If you need something, but it's only for special, circumstances, and you rarely use it, but you need it, of course that stays. Then you get to the third question, do you love it? It's an art supply, yes. Okay, well, yeah, probably. But do you love the craft? Do you love doing that? Like I talked about the knitting. Does it add value to your life? What is its purpose? What does it do? So really just analyze why you love it and how you can make it more functional in your life. If it's not functioning, if you're not using it, but you love it, ask yourself why. If you love it, why wouldn't you use it? Or maybe some things are aesthetic value. Maybe it's a piece of artwork and you want to hang it up. Or maybe it's antique art supplies that look beautiful and you create a piece of artwork with them. So if you love it and you want to keep it, see if there's a way that you can use it or make it more functional so that it earns its keep in your space, because you are paying the mortgage for it to live with you. So it should be earning its keep. Okay. If it's not, let it go. Easier said than done. Okay. Now the next step is to assign an address, basically. So there are some ways to think about this to decide where it makes sense to have your items live. And I have these 4 F words that can actually help. The first one is function. So obviously, if it's an art or craft supply, you want to think about it living where you actually do your art and craft. Okay. Now, that may or may not work in your house. Maybe the only space you have to work on your arts or crafts is at the dining room table, or maybe you like to do things in the living room, on the couch, watching TV, or whatever it is. So think about where you're going to be using these things, and is there a way to store or assign an address that works with that. Now, if you, for example, are working on the dining room table, and then you have to think about, okay, does it fit here? Does it fit in the dining room? Let's start there. Okay, well, in the dining room, I have a china hutch that's full of dishes, and I have a table, but I don't have any kind of closet. So that's where the fit comes in. Does it fit in this space? And the answer to that could be no, or it could be yes. So if it doesn't fit in that space, then you have to think of a contingency plan. The other thing to think about in that space is form. How does it look? Maybe you could replace the dishes out of the china hutch and put your art supplies there. Now, form is how does it look there, and you might love it. You might think, oh my gosh, that's the best thing since sliced bread, to have my art supplies right there in the kitchen, right next to my table where I do my art. But your husband or your significant other or whoever it is, your kids, whatever, might be like, mom or dad, like, I don't want to look at your art stuff while I'm eating. That doesn't feed my soul. It may feed your soul, but it may not feed the rest of the family's soul. So you have to think about that. Now, my stuff does live pretty much all in the main area, and I don't know that my boyfriend loves that, but it was here first, and I love it. So it's just that's where it's gonna live. Sorry, Louise, but so anyway, you have to think about that. How does it look there? And everybody has a different opinion about that. The other thing you have to think about is the frequency of using the item. So let's say that let's still talk about this dining room. Maybe I craft daily, maybe I craft every other day or weekly, and I do it in that room, but there's no fit. One option you can do is to have a portable station. So maybe the storage space that you have is actually in the guest room, but you like to do the art in the dining room because that's where the table is. So you can have a rolling cart, and I actually do use a rolling cart. I have one right here that I use that has the stuff that I use most frequently on it. And that's what you could do, is have a rolling cart that's maybe like your mobile art station, if you will. And then you can roll that out, and then the other stuff is in bins and it's portable, so you can bring it to the workstation when you need it. But you want to have everything that you're going to use most frequently on that cart, because that's the thing that's going to be at your workspace. And that goes for if you have a workbench or an art desk. So that's the fourth F, is frequency. How often do you use the item? Think real estate zones. So the more frequent that you use it, that's the bullseye of this target that I have on the screen. The more frequent you use it, the closer you want it to be next to you. I want these things within arm's reach. Everything that I have in arm's reach are things that I'm going to use daily. If it's something that I use often, maybe I use it every week, but I don't use it every day, all day, then I don't mind maybe going to the other side of my desk in the drawer over there that I have to maybe roll my chair over, or I have to get up and walk a couple steps to get that. Okay, so the more important or the more frequent that you use it, the closer you want it to your workstation. And again, this is going to depend on if you have space there. So if you do actually have an art studio, this is how you would set it up. You would have the things that you use most frequently right at your desk, right at your fingertips, and then they move further and further out depending on the frequency that you use them. If you use them once a year, it's like, okay, I sometimes bring a projector out of the wall to do a mural, out of the wall projector to use. I don't know what I'm saying. Sometimes I use I don't even have a projector. Okay, but if you have a projector to do a wall mural, for example, but let's say you rarely do wall murals, but if you have one, maybe that could go live in the attic because it's just something that you pull out once in a while. You may do another wall mural, but it's not something you do daily. Okay, so you can have this projector that helps you draw on the wall, but it can go out of your common space. You know, it doesn't have to live right and take up prime real estate next to you. So think about that when you're deciding where it's going to live and what makes the most sense with how much stuff you have. It's ideally, if you could have all of your art stuff together, that would be the best, because then you can go, okay, I want to create something. I go to one spot and it's all there. Sometimes that's just not reasonable. You may not have the space in one area to do that, but that would be the ideal. And then you just work with what you have and how big your stash is. You might decide that you need to trim your stash based on how much space you have. That's basically what I did. I said, okay, I've got these many bookshelves and this cabinet, and if it can't fit in there, then I have to get rid of it. So that was my goal. And maybe I decided everything I had was worth, keeping, and I had to put it into another room. But then I really had to decide that. I was like, okay, I'm going to try to fit into this space as much as possible because I don't want it taking over these other areas. So you have to, think about these different things when you're deciding where it's going to live. Okay, once you decide where it's going to live, and people always like to go to this step first. This is one of the steps that people are like, oh, I got this bin for my stuff. I got this shelving unit. I got this whatever. They always want to start with containerizing. And that is a fun step. Don't get me wrong. I love, containers. The Container Store is like a candy store to me, if you have one of those in your areas. But IKEA is also amazing for storage. But that's just not the first step that you need to have, because you need to know what all you're containing. So now that you've gathered all your art supplies, you know how many skeins of yarn and how many paints. Now you can kind of get an idea, how big of a container do I need for these items? And you can start planning, and maybe you can think, okay, I need this much linear shelf space, and this bin, do some measurements. How deep are these bins? Can it maximize the space? The home is a fixed space, even though we can maximize the space that's in it. Think go high, use the wall, use the height of the space, but it's a limited container. And so there's only so much you can actually put in it, but you can maximize it by thinking about these things ahead of time. If you just go buy containers without thinking about what you're fitting in it, you may not have the best containers for the job. And you may not have the space set up as efficient as you want. One time, I knew of someone who bought this wire shelving, and they wanted to put all these bins on it to store, fabric. And they did measure the shelves, and they bought bins, but these bins were shaped like this. Like they had a really narrow bottom, and then they angled up at the top, sort of, not, maybe I'm exaggerating, but there was a lot of empty space at the bottom because they were designed to stack within each other, and so they were really narrow at the bottom. So even though the tops of it fit perfectly on the shelf, the bottom angled in, and you lost a couple inches of space on that shelf. Now, it would have been better to have bins that were straight down, that filled up those gaps of space, rather than having those nesting bins that really angled in sharply. So thinking about things like that, just maximizing every little space that you have, finding bins that are the full depth of your shelf or the full width of your shelf. That's going to be ways to maximize that space, those areas, and not leave little gaps behind or in between. Filling up every single bit of space is how I can fit all my stuff in here. So that's what I do. And I'm going to be giving a tour. So I'm going to show you how I filled up. I mean, I played Tetris when I was younger, and I can fit some stuff in. Let me tell you. So anyway, okay, back to containerize. You want to also think about avoiding stacking if possible. Maybe one high is easy enough to grab, like one from underneath. But if you stack 10 bins high, how am I going to get to that bottom bin? it's going to take me several steps because I got to move the top bins, and then I get to that one, and then I got to open it. How many steps is it going to take for me to get to that thing? Now, when you're in a project and you're excited about doing the project, you're motivated to get that item out, right? So you're like, oh, well, I'll get it. You know, it's in there. I know it's in there. I can just, you know, I can lift these off and get to it. That's great. But once you get that brush out of there and you use it, now you're not as motivated to put it back in because you don't need the item. You want to put it back in to declutter your space, but it's just not as fun to unload all those bins because you're not as motivated to do it. And so that's when the whole last step can fall apart, which I'll get to in a second. So it's important to keep that in mind. You want to keep your everything as accessible as possible. Try not to stack more than one on top of something else, and avoid stacking at all if possible. Sometimes it's just not possible to maximize the space without some stacking. Sometimes you can store things sideways instead of stacking, so that like, especially if it's flat, like for example, canvases. Don't ever store canvases flat because you have to stack them all and you could probably damage them. It's much better to stack them sideways. So think about that as you're deciding where exactly these are going to live. You want to make it easy to access, to get, and easy to put away. You also want to consider leaving space for expansion. If it's something that you're going to get more of, like maybe art books or skeins of yarn is a popular one, make sure that you don't fit everything exactly in the space and then you can't add one more item. If you're likely to expand, you need to take that into consideration. If you always get more yarn than you use, then you need to come up with a plan. You either need to create some extra space to handle that, to give you some wiggle room, because you're probably going to buy before you use, or you can have a one in, one out. If you buy more than can fit in that specific space, you can always have a rule where you say, okay, I'm going to, if I can't fit it in the space, I'm going to donate old yarn that I don't like. So that way you don't expand beyond that. But it's a good idea to just keep in mind, is this something that's an expanding collection or is it a fixed collection? And what am I going to do about that if it expands more? If one more is just going to topple my whole system, you know, I've got to be prepared for that. So keep an eye on that. That's good for closets too. If you filled your closet with clothes, like a one in, one out rule is great. Donate something. If you buy another sweater, donate a sweater. And that's a good way to keep things under control. The final step and the most challenging is equalize. And this is an ongoing step. You're always going to be maintaining the system. You're going to be fine-tuning it, adjusting it. Your needs are going to change and the system will change too. So as you expand, for example, you're going to have to go, okay, well, maybe I need to buy another shelf, or, you know, can I expand above that shelving unit, or whatever it is. So you're going to have to make it flexible enough to expand with you as necessary, or adjust with you as necessary. Maybe you decide, okay, I'm giving up yarn now, or giving up knitting now, so I'm going to open up all of these shelves for these things because I'm really getting into mixed media instead. So it's going to be an ever-changing system, but now it's manageable. Now it's just going to take fine-tuning to make it work ideally for you. So be patient, as there are going to be some growing pains. It'll take a while for you to remember where everything is, but labeling is a great way to make sure that you can find everything. And I'm going to be going over some top tips for doing that in the part 2 when I give you guys the tour of my stash. All right, and the final thing to remember is you got this. So get to organizing. Just if you can't decide where to start, sometimes, like if you have an entire craft room and you're just like, I don't even know where to begin, here's a little tip. You can just take a paper towel roll, like a telescope, and just rotate around and then stop, and then whatever you're looking at, that can be your start. And if it's too overwhelming to look at everything, sometimes that can be overwhelming because you start getting distracted by what else is out. You can always cover things with sheets, like put sheets over it. If it's not part of what you're working on now, put sheets over it just to hide it so that it's out of sight, out of mind, and you can focus on what you're doing. Another little tip is you can set a timer and say, okay, I'm going to work on this project for this long. And don't set it for too long. Maybe start with 10 minutes. Say, okay, I'm going to work on it for 10 minutes. That's an easy success to do, get you going, and then you can say, oh, this isn't so bad. And then after 10 minutes, you might go, oh, I can do it for another 10 minutes. So hopefully that'll get you started, and hopefully some of my tips when I give you the tour of my stash and my space will help motivate you to get your space organized so that when you're in the flow and the zone of creating, you don't get sidetracked or derailed by clutter or not being able to find your stash. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much, and like, subscribe, share, all of that if you find this content helpful. Thank you so much.